Hope enters quietly, like a soft voice in the darkness. It does not announce itself with force, nor does it demand your attention the way fear or anger does. Instead, it settles into your mind with the gentleness of a lullaby, whispering that no matter how difficult life feels today, tomorrow holds something better. That small whisper feels harmless, even nourishing, because it gives you a reason to keep walking when the road grows unbearable. You cling to it when everything else seems to collapse, when you are betrayed, when you fail, when you are lost in the shadows of despair. Hope becomes the invisible hand that steadies you, the promise that this suffering is temporary, that something brighter waits on the horizon. And because it feels sweet, because it feels protective, you welcome it without suspicion. You drink it as if it were water, never wondering if it might be wine. Intoxicating, pleasant, but ultimately blinding. What begins as comfort quickly transforms into dependence. The sweetness of hope is not just in the relief it brings, but in the way it numbs the mind. Pain becomes easier to endure, not because it lessens, but because you convince yourself it has meaning. You believe the struggle is preparing you for the reward that hope promises will one day arrive. And so you endure more, you wait longer, you stay in places where you should have walked away, believing that if you just hold on, the future will vindicate your patience. That is the secret power of hope. It seduces you into believing endurance is victory, when in truth, it might be nothing more than a slow poison, feeding you illusions while time slips away. The beginning of hope is always sweet, but sweetness is not the same as nourishment. It is sugar on the tongue, pleasurable, addictive, and empty. The sweetness blinds you to its cost, and in that blindness, you do not yet see the poison beginning to work its way into your veins. The danger of hope lies not in its arrival, but in the way it slowly reshapes your relationship with reality. When you first grasp it, you believe it is a companion, a friend walking beside you to guide you through the storm. But as days stretch into months and months dissolve into years, you begin to notice that you are no longer walking with hope. It is leading you, pulling you forward into a horizon that never seems to draw closer. Like a mirage shimmering on desert sands, hope convinces you that relief is just beyond the next ridge, just beyond the next day, just beyond this suffering. And so you crawl, blistered and weary, mistaking your survival for progress, mistaking your chains for strength. The seduction of hope is that it convinces you to stay where you are when you should move, convinces you to wait when you should act, convinces you to endure when you should resist. You remain in relationships that corrode you, telling yourself they will one day change. You stay in jobs that devour your spirit, believing a promotion will someday make the pain worth it. You tolerate betrayals, abuses, and failures because hope whispers that each one is merely part of a story that ends in redemption. But what if the story has no such ending? What if the promise is not a promise at all, but a lie you repeat to yourself because the alternative, the cold emptiness of truth, is too sharp to face? Hope thrives in that avoidance, feeding on your refusal to confront reality as it is. And the more you feed it, the more dependent you become. You no longer measure life by what is happening, but by what might happen, by what could be, by what tomorrow might bring. You no longer live in the present. You live in a suspended dream, a future that never arrives. The sweetness of hope numbs the bitterness of truth, and so you choose the sweetness again and again, until you no longer notice how thin you have become, how drained, how hollow. It does not feel like poison yet. The most haunting truth about hope is that it does not feel like poison until it is too late. In the beginning, it soothes you, steadies you, carries you through nights of despair. But with each passing day, it weaves invisible threads around you, tying you not to reality, but to the illusion of a future that never arrives. You do not notice the threads at first. They feel like comfort, like safety. Yet over time, they harden into chains. You begin to measure your life not by what you have done, but by what you are still waiting for. You convince yourself that all this endurance has meaning, that one day it will prove itself worth the years you have given away. But meaning is not guaranteed. Time does not care for your patience, nor does the world reward you for suffering in silence. Every day you wait is a day lost forever. Every moment endured for the sake of tomorrow is a moment that could have been lived today. And this is the cruelty of hope. It makes you believe you are surviving, even thriving, when in truth, you are only postponing the collapse. You tell yourself you are strong for waiting, noble for holding on, faithful for believing. But strength, nobility, and faith mean nothing if they are wasted on illusions. The sweetness of hope blinds you to its emptiness until you are so deep in its grip that you no longer remember what it feels like to act without it. You mistake your own paralysis for patience, your stagnation for endurance, your fear for faith. And when the moment comes that you finally look back, when you finally count the years lost to waiting, you will see that hope was not your savior, but your executioner. It killed you not with violence, but with comfort. It lulled you into a sleep from which you never fully awoke. That is why hope is the sweetest poison. It does not burn your throat as it enters. It does not leave scars upon your skin. It tastes like sugar. It feels like safety. It cloaks itself as love. There is a cruelty hidden in the promises of tomorrow. It is the quiet trap that convinces you to suffer in the present because something better must surely arrive later. This is how the sweetness of hope hardens into chains, not with force, but with suggestion. You accept the pain of today because you imagine it will buy you relief in the future. You endure mistreatment in relationships because you cling to the belief that patience will soften cruelty into kindness. You accept exploitation in work because you tell yourself that loyalty and sacrifice will one day be rewarded. You silence your dissatisfaction, swallow your anger, and choke back your despair because you are certain that endurance must lead to redemption. But life does not bargain with such faith. Life does not hand out justice simply because you endured more suffering than another. And yet, you remain tethered. Each morning, you wake and convince yourself to bear one more day, because surely the reward is closer now. Surely tomorrow will prove that the waiting was not in vain. The promise of tomorrow becomes the lock on your cage, and hope is the key you never dare to throw away. You could leave, you could resist, you could break free, but you will not, because you believe leaving now would mean losing the reward you have been suffering for. So you remain, trapped not by external force, but by the weight of your own imagined future. The chains are invisible, but they are stronger than iron, because you forged them yourself. They are the illusions you repeat, the stories you tell, the fantasies you polish so carefully that they gleam brighter than truth. And while you polish them, time slips away, and you do not notice how heavy the shackles have become. You mistake your immobility for patience, your paralysis for strength. But the truth is simpler and far darker. You are not patient. You are bound. The most dangerous prisons are not built from stone, but from expectation. And nothing fuels expectation like the sweetness of a deferred tomorrow. The more you believe in what lies ahead, the less you resist what is happening now. You convince yourself that betrayal is temporary, that suffering is meaningful, that neglect is only the shadow of love yet to come. You kneel before illusions, and you call that faith. And in kneeling, you forget that every hour surrendered to this waiting is an hour stolen from your own life. But hope convinces you to call theft a gift. It convinces you that postponing joy is the same as achieving it, that enduring abuse is the same as proving strength. The lie becomes so polished that you no longer notice its cracks. You defend it when others question you, insisting they do not understand your journey, your patience, your loyalty. In truth, you defend not yourself, but the chains that hold you. Because if you admit they are chains, you must admit you wasted years carrying them. The mind resists that kind of clarity, and so it chooses the comfort of illusion. It chooses to believe that tomorrow is salvation, even if tomorrow never arrives. This is why hope is not just a drug, but a leash. It leads you in circles, always forward, but never closer. You march willingly, even proudly, dragging your own shackles through the dirt, telling yourself you are progressing. You are not progressing. You are orbiting, circling the same horizon, believing that each turn brings you closer, when in truth you are caught in an endless loop. And while you circle, those who see clearly pass you by. They do not wait. They do not kneel. They do not pray for tomorrow. They move. They act. They tear the chains apart with the cruelty of truth. And though their path is colder, sharper, and filled with blood, it is free. Freedom is not found in waiting for tomorrow. It is found in breaking the illusion of tomorrow entirely. The chains of tomorrow are the most seductive form of captivity because they do not feel like captivity at all. They feel like purpose, like direction, like faith. You believe you are strong because you endure, noble because you wait, faithful because you continue to believe. But endurance without movement is stagnation, nobility without clarity is delusion, and faith without truth is self-destruction. The sweetness of hope blinds you to this, and you become intoxicated with your own suffering, imagining that one day it will all make sense. But what if it never does? What if the years you spend enduring were not a test, but simply wasted years? What if the chains you carried were not the weight of destiny, but the burden of illusion? That is the tragedy of hope. It keeps you alive, but it does not let you live. It keeps you moving, but it never lets you arrive. And when the end finally comes, when time itself runs out, you will not be rewarded for your patience. There will be no compensation for the years you traded away, no justice for the suffering you endured, no prize waiting on the other side of silence. There will only be the realization that the sweetness you drank all your life was poison, and the chains you carried were of your own making. The cruelest poison is not the one that kills you quickly, but the one that makes you believe you are thriving while it drains you slowly. Hope is that poison. It is the sugar that keeps you walking deeper into the desert, the leash that keeps you kneeling at the feet of false promises. And unless you learn to see it for what it is, you will live and die in chains, mistaking captivity for purpose and endurance for strength. Hope is not always an innocent companion. It can also be a blade in the hands of those who understand its true force. Those who hold power know that fear alone is crude and obvious, easily recognized and resisted. But hope is subtle, invisible, and far more effective. It is the currency of obedience, the oil that greases the wheels of manipulation. Leaders, lovers, tyrants, and institutions alike understand this instinctively. They promise what cannot be delivered. They paint the future in colors brighter than the present, and they watch as you bend under the weight of your own belief. The promise of better days, the suggestion that perseverance will lead to reward, the idea that patience will earn justice. These are the tools of influence that keep populations, followers, and lovers tethered without chains. And because you want to believe, because you crave salvation in whatever form it is offered, you do not resist. You do not see the trap. You hand over your will willingly, thinking you are marching toward freedom when in fact you are being guided into captivity. This is the brilliance of hope as a weapon. It turns your own desires into instruments of control. You work harder, forgive longer, endure more, and all the while, the promise of reward hangs just out of reach, dangling like a carrot you will never bite. Every effort you make, every sacrifice you offer, only strengthens the grip of the one who holds the illusion. The more you invest, the more dependent you become. And in this cycle, power becomes effortless for those who understand it, not through force, but through the quiet, persistent promise that something better lies ahead, if only you continue to obey. Hope, in their hands, is not a friend. It is the quietest, deadliest kind of domination, because it disguises itself as desire, as faith, as love. It is terrifying how willingly we surrender to it. You think you are making choices, that your path is yours alone, that your decisions reflect strength, courage, or wisdom. But when hope is used as a weapon, your choices are already narrowed, predetermined, calculated by forces you cannot see. The promise of a better tomorrow bends your mind into compliance. You forgive transgressions that should never be forgiven. You endure humiliations that should never be tolerated. You wait for rewards that will never arrive. All because someone, somewhere, whispered the right words at the right time and you allowed yourself to be convinced. This is not happenstance. It is strategy. It is timeless. From emperors to modern CEOs, from tyrants to charming manipulators, the same principle repeats. Hope ensures loyalty, patience, and obedience without coercion. People will fight, bleed, and sacrifice for illusions if they believe those illusions will protect them or lift them higher. And the most insidious part is that you participate in your own manipulation. You polish the chains, feed the promises, and strengthen the structure, believing that the architecture itself is your salvation. You are complicit because the sweetness of hope is stronger than suspicion, because desire blinds reasoning, because the human mind seeks comfort even when that comfort carries its own destruction. Every tomorrow you wait for, every someday you cling to, is another brick in a cage built not by your enemies, but by the very instincts you thought were your own. And the cage is invisible. You cannot see the bars, the locks, the hinges. You only see the promise shimmering beyond them, the future glowing like gold in a place you cannot reach. And because you see it, you keep walking toward it, never realizing that the path was chosen for you. The destination was never real, and the hands that guided you are already strong enough to hold your will in their grasp. Eventually, you may begin to sense the manipulation, the invisible strings, the quiet architecture of control that has shaped your life. But sensing is not the same as escaping. The sweetness of hope has become entwined with your identity, inseparable from the person you think you are. It is no longer an external force. It has seeped inside, telling you that surrender is patience, compliance is loyalty, and endurance is strength. You fight to break free, to reclaim your agency, but the mental scaffolding is already complete. Every moment of hesitation, every pause in action, every glimpse of clarity is softened by the comforting notion that you are waiting for something better. Even when evidence piles around you, even when every promise proves empty, even when the reward is clearly a phantom, you return to the same illusions because the sweetness is addictive, and the human mind is reluctant to taste bitter truth when sugar lies on the tongue. And so, power becomes effortless for those who know the strategy. They do not need threats, coercion, or intimidation. They need only the patient cultivation of expectation, the careful planting of deferred satisfaction, the subtle weaving of tomorrow's promise into every thought, every hope, every breath. By the time you realize that your dreams were used to bind you, the chains are already deep within your habits, your fears, and your beliefs. And yet, in this trap, there is a dark lesson. To survive, you must recognize the weapon for what it is. Hope, wielded by another, is not a gift. It is a lure. It is a strategy that exploits desire, patience, and faith to create compliance without struggle. And the more you understand this, the more you see that true power is not in waiting, in believing, or in hoping. It is in seeing the mechanism clearly, in tearing the illusion apart, and in reclaiming your mind before it becomes the battlefield for someone else's ambitions. Hope is not always imposed from outside. Often, it is the most dangerous when it is born inside, nurtured by our own minds, and repeated to ourselves until it becomes indistinguishable from truth. We tell ourselves stories about what could be, what might come, what tomorrow promises, and in doing so, we deceive ourselves into believing that endurance alone is enough to claim salvation. We repeat the words like a prayer. One day, it will change. One day, it will be better. One day, I will be free. And at first, the repetition feels comforting, like a soft wind on a sweltering day, or the quiet assurance of a familiar friend. But comfort is a double-edged sword. Every time we whisper these promises to ourselves, we reinforce the illusion, and every reinforcement thickens the walls around our minds. We begin to tolerate what we should never tolerate, to forgive what should never be forgiven, to wait for outcomes that have no certainty. The human mind is wired to find meaning, even in suffering, and hope is its preferred cloak. We wrap ourselves in it, believing it protects us from despair, even as it blinds us to the truth of our circumstances. This internal hope is a self-made trap. Unlike the hope imposed by others, which can be recognized and resisted, this one is intimate, personal, and invisible. It is so deeply entwined with our identity, with the story we tell ourselves about who we are, that to question it feels like questioning the essence of life itself. We begin to mistake the lie for a moral compass, endurance for wisdom, patience for virtue. And the sweetness of the lie is its danger. It masks the poison. We drink it eagerly, believing it nourishes, when in truth, it erodes the very foundation of our freedom. Each day we cling to it. Each hour we convince ourselves that the story is true. We move further from clarity, deeper into a cage built by our own imagination. The self-deception of hope is meticulous in its cruelty. It does not strike suddenly, does not announce itself with drama. Instead, it creeps in quietly, filling the cracks in our consciousness with the illusion of purpose and promise. We begin to interpret every small event as a sign that the narrative we created for ourselves is true. A kind word becomes evidence of loyalty. A brief moment of success becomes proof that endurance will be rewarded. Every act, no matter how insignificant, is interpreted as a confirmation that the future will be kinder, that the suffering endured has meaning, that patience is its own reward. And the more we invest in these interpretations, the harder it becomes to break free. We construct layers upon layers of justification. If I endure this, I will gain strength. If I forgive this, I will find peace. If I wait, I will be rewarded. Each layer is a brick in a wall, invisible to anyone but ourselves, and over time, it becomes so solid that the possibility of escape or rebellion feels unimaginable. The paradox is cruel. Hope is meant to uplift, to sustain, to inspire, yet here it does the opposite. It blinds us to our own power, convinces us to accept what should be unacceptable, and teaches us to value waiting over acting. We become prisoners in our own minds, chained not by others, but by the very desires that once made us human. Every decision is filtered through the lens of this lie, every choice measured against a phantom future, every action delayed because we are waiting for the impossible to arrive. And as the years accumulate, the lie becomes a habit, and the habit becomes identity. The sweetness of it is undeniable, intoxicating. We comfort ourselves with the thought that suffering is meaningful, that endurance is noble, that hope itself is proof that life has purpose. Yet beneath the sugar lies the rot. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of the lie is that it requires our complicity. Unlike fear, which can be forced upon us, or oppression, which can be visible and tangible, the sweet internal hope demands that we participate willingly. We polish it, we nurture it, we speak it aloud in quiet moments until it becomes the rhythm of our consciousness. And because we nurture it, we defend it, even against truth. Any challenge to it feels like betrayal, not revelation. The mind prefers the comfort of a pleasant fiction over the harshness of reality, and so it fights for the lie with the same ferocity it might once have fought for freedom. We call it resilience, but it is not resilience. It is submission. We call it patience, but it is not patience. It is inertia. We call it faith, but it is not faith. It is self-deception. And yet, despite its destructiveness, we cling to it, because hope tastes sweet, because it softens the sting of failure, because it offers the illusion of control in a world where control is often an illusion itself. We begin to confuse the sweetness with nourishment, believing that the comfort of imagined futures is as valuable as the reality we inhabit. We whisper to ourselves, over and over, that we are not trapped, that we are waiting, that we are preparing, that the story is still unfolding. But the lie has already done its work. The walls are built, the chains are forged, and our own minds have become the jailers. And when the day comes, when time finally strips away the illusions and confronts us with the emptiness of our waiting, the sweetness is revealed as poison. The lie we told ourselves, the hope we nurtured within, has not saved us. It has held us, restricted us, and consumed us from the inside. The most dangerous hope is not the one promised by others. It is the one you cultivate yourself, because it is intimate, invisible, and trusted. There comes a point when hope stops being a companion and becomes a substitute for doing. It lulls the mind into a trance where waiting is mistaken for progress, and wishing is mistaken for effort. You tell yourself that things will improve, that the right moment will arrive, that opportunities will fall into your lap if you just endure a little longer. And in this waiting, life slips past unnoticed. Every hour spent hoping without moving is a small surrender of power. Every day spent imagining a better tomorrow is a day in which the present is stolen. The illusion of hope convinces you that your endurance is enough, that belief can carry you, that patience is a form of action. You forgive what should never be forgiven, endure what should never be endured, and tolerate what should never be tolerated because you believe that something beyond the now will reward you. And yet, that something is often imaginary. The mind, when seduced by hope, becomes a theater for fantasies, a place where action is optional and suffering is tolerable because it is assumed to have meaning. Meanwhile, reality continues to move, indifferent to your waiting. Opportunities vanish while you stand still, relationships decay while you cling to imagined redemption, and the world keeps turning while you calculate the right moment that will never come. In this way, hope becomes not just a comfort, but a prison. It seduces you into inactivity, masks indecision as strategy, and paralyzes the will while offering the illusion of purpose. By the time you realize the harm it has done, the years have passed, the options have dwindled, and the strength that might have carried you forward has been sapped by a habit of waiting rather than acting. Hope, when it replaces action, is no longer a friend. It is a thief, and it steals relentlessly, leaving only regret behind. The subtlety of this paralysis is terrifying because it feels righteous, noble even. Waiting under the banner of hope appears virtuous. The world praises endurance, patience, and faith. But these virtues are hollow when they replace the work that must be done, the risks that must be taken, the choices that must be made. Waiting for an imagined future allows you to evade responsibility in the present. It convinces you that waiting is equivalent to preparation, that dreaming is equivalent to effort, that wishing is equivalent to striving. And in this belief, the mind becomes its own captor. You strategize endlessly, plan meticulously, and debate internally over what might or might not happen, all while avoiding the immediate and necessary actions that define control over your own life. You might think you are careful, calculating, wise, but what you are, most often, is frozen by expectation, paralyzed by the very hope you cherish. Time, however, is cruelly impartial. While you calculate and wait, it moves forward relentlessly, indifferent to belief, indifferent to loyalty, indifferent to suffering. Others move, act, risk, and conquer in ways you only imagine for yourself. And when they succeed, the world applauds their clarity, their decisiveness, their ability to seize rather than hope. In contrast, your waiting appears foolish in retrospect, your patience a hollow shell, and your faith a substitute for courage. The bitter truth is that hope is seductive precisely because it allows you to delay life without feeling the weight of responsibility, to live in suspended anticipation while the present slips through your fingers, and to believe that surrender to inaction is a form of discipline. Yet there is no virtue in waiting when waiting itself becomes a method of avoidance. The more you wait, the further you fall behind, and the deeper you sink into the trap where hope disguises itself as preparation and inaction masquerades as wisdom. And the cruelest part is that this trap is invisible until it is too late. You convince yourself that waiting is strategic, that patience will yield rewards, that endurance is strength. You believe you are acting simply on a higher timeline, playing a long game beyond the comprehension of those around you. But in reality, the long game is a fiction you tell yourself, a comforting story to justify stagnation, to mask fear, and to delay decision. Every day spent waiting is a day lost forever. Every moment surrendered to hope is a moment stolen from the life you could have lived. And yet, the sweetness of it is irresistible. It tells you that you are strong, that you are faithful, that you are wise. It tells you that suffering is meaningful and waiting is noble. But the truth does not flatter. The truth strips away illusions. The truth is that action, not hope, is what shapes life. Waiting, believing, imagining, hoping, these are only shadows of agency. When hope replaces action, it becomes a poison disguised as virtue, a sweetness that seduces the mind while paralyzing the will. And the most devastating realization is that the years you gave to waiting will never return, the opportunities you deferred will never forgive you, and the life you might have built while others moved forward will be lost to the same seductive lullabies you called hope. The poison is not dramatic. It does not burn. It does not warn. It flows silently, sweetly, invisibly, until you find that freedom, power, and choice have slipped through your fingers, leaving only regret, emptiness, and the bitter taste of a life lived in suspended anticipation. The moment the veil of hope finally lifts is both devastating and illuminating. You realize, with a cold clarity that is almost unbearable, that the life you believed in, the future you imagined, and the salvation you clung to were all constructs, fragile illusions built by desire and fear, nurtured by your own mind and reinforced by the whispers of the world. Every deferred dream, every imagined reward, every promise of better days that kept you tethered to suffering is revealed as what it truly was, a mirage that distracted you from the only reality that mattered, the present moment, the choices you could make, the power you held but refused to claim. The weight of years spent waiting, enduring, forgiving, and believing sinks into your bones, and it is heavy, almost suffocating. You feel the sting of betrayal, not from others, but from yourself, from the part of you that allowed patience to replace action, that allowed faith to replace clarity, that allowed imagined futures to dictate the present. The realization cuts deeper than any wound inflicted by circumstance or cruelty because it is an internal wound, a fracture in the foundation of your perception. You understand, finally, that the sweetness you once drank so eagerly, thinking it was life, was slowly poisoning you, blending comfort with captivity until you could no longer distinguish between the two. The poison was never dramatic, never violent, never sudden. It was subtle, seductive, slow, a gentle erosion of freedom disguised as hope, a lullaby that made suffering tolerable while time itself slipped silently through your fingers. And the most haunting aspect is that for decades, or perhaps for a lifetime, you believed in this hope so completely that even your doubts were shaped by it. Your decisions filtered through its lens, and your endurance praised by your own mind as virtue, when in truth, it was complicity. The aftermath of this revelation is a landscape both barren and immense. Without the illusions to guide, comfort, or deceive you, you are exposed to reality in its rawest, most unforgiving form. The structures you once leaned upon, the imagined rewards, the deferred justice, the promises of tomorrow, have crumbled, leaving only the stark terrain of consequence, responsibility, and personal agency. At first, this exposure is terrifying, almost paralyzing, because hope had been a soft cushion for your mind, a sugar coating that hid the sharp edges of truth, a framework that made suffering feel purposeful. Without it, You see the world as it is, indifferent, unyielding, and entirely unconcerned with patience, endurance, or fidelity. And yet, within this harsh clarity lies something that hope could never provide: the power to act without illusion, the ability to build without being shackled by expectation, the courage to move forward unburdened by the fantasy of reward. You begin to understand that hope, like any tool, is only as valuable as the awareness with which it is wielded. When trusted blindly, it becomes poison. When recognized, understood, and integrated into conscious choice, it becomes fuel. The mind that once surrendered itself to mirages now sees paths where before there were only shadows. The chains that held you, chains constructed from desire, expectation, and self-deception, are visible now, and for the first time, you can grasp the keys that unlock them. This process is not instantaneous. It requires brutal honesty, relentless self-reflection, and the willingness to confront every corner of your own complicity. You must face not only the years lost to waiting, but the moments in which you ignored instinct, avoided responsibility, or sacrificed your own judgment in the name of imagined futures. In this final stage, the sweetness that once nourished you now tastes like ash, bitter and instructive. You see with unflinching clarity the countless ways in which hope, left unchecked, allowed time to slip, disguised in the guise of patience and endurance. You see the opportunities deferred, the choices ignored, the power abandoned to illusions, the years wasted in a trance of imagined salvation. But this bitter realization is also a revelation. The poison, once recognized, loses its control. The clarity that comes with the death of illusion is not comfortable, nor forgiving, nor gentle. It is absolute, harsh, and luminous. And yet, it is here, in this confrontation, that the possibility of true agency emerges. You are no longer waiting for someone, somewhere, something to deliver the future. You are no longer enslaved by the sugar-coated promises of comfort, revenge, redemption, or recognition. Every step you take from this point is informed by awareness, every decision guided by your own judgment, every action an exercise of power that belongs solely to you. Freedom is terrifying because it is raw, but it is the only antidote to the poison that hope disguised as sweetness once poured into your veins. And as you look back on the years spent believing, waiting, and enduring, you understand the paradox of life. The sweetest poison can only be transformed into strength when it is seen for what it truly is. The illusions die, the mirages fade, and in their place remains a mind unshackled, a will unbroken, and a life reclaimed. The final truth is simple yet haunting. Hope, in its purest form, is not the promise of salvation. It is a reflection of desire, and only by facing reality, embracing clarity, and acting decisively can one drink without being poisoned. And in this realization, the life you thought you lost begins again, not in waiting, but in the uncompromising act of living fully, consciously, and free.